Hello, dear victims, and welcome back for the fourth episode of the Endarkened podcast. This is your host, Shadow Master, and I am joined once again by my co-host,
The Acolyte.
Today we'll be reviewing the 2018 film. Yes, 2018, and you'll find out in a moment why I'm emphasizing that year so much. Await further instructions. This is a film about the horrors of compliance and when it goes too far. It also delves into the concept of aligning with authority to seek respect or approval. Now, if you do like what we do, please sharpen up a candy cane and give that like button a stab, or hide out menacingly in the back of our sleigh ride by giving us a subscribe, and keep tabs on us to see if we're being naughty or nice. As we begin the film, we learn that we're going to be spending Christmas with the Milgram family. Now, I know a few of you are going to be familiar with that name. The family in this film, once again called Await Further Instructions, is named after the famous experiment.
The Milgram experiment is an experiment from the 1960s in which Dr. Milgram had a group of participants issue increasingly painful electric shocks to an actor who feigned distress. The point of the experiment was to see if these participants would commit acts of extreme sadism and violence to an individual under the guise of an authority figure telling them that they had to. The conclusion of the experiment was that yes, they would, which leads us to the Milgram family on their scenic family holiday.
The cast consists of a very old and very racist grandfather, whose name we do not know, nor should we care, his son Tony, and Tony's wife Beth. Tony and Beth are the father and mother of Nick and Kate. Kate is currently pregnant by her husband Scott, and Nick is dating a woman of Indian heritage named Angira, or for short, Angie.
Oh yeah, this is totally gonna go fine.
Can't imagine what Grandpa might have to say early on. Now that we've set up the film, I'm going to issue a spoiler warning and say that from now on, pretty much everything we talk about is going to get into the actual plot. So if you would like to watch the movie first and come back to us, stop and do so. Otherwise, keep on listening. So one of the first scenes that we are privy to is Grandpa watching a crime being reported on the news and blaming it immediately on everyone in a 10-mile radius whose skin is not the same color as his. Obviously, Nick does not take too kindly to it, and for some strange reason, as you pointed out, Kyle, members of the family want to defend Grandpa.
Literally, Grandpa just immediately starts calling on just slurs. Like immediately off the bat, and the family has to defend that.
Especially Kate. Kate gets pretty adamant about it.
Pretty much a stereotypical, racist family caricature we have going on here. Nick and Angie plan a visit to Nick's family for the holidays. Nick having not seen his family in over 3 years. The reasons for that are pretty obvious when we are introduced to the family, starting with Grandpa.
Yeah. And we kind of learn also that Grandpa is not just racist, he also believes in the severe method of child rearing. So the family's kind of racked with generational trauma. He's clearly issued abuse of all kinds, including physical, to his son Tony, who still kind of feels like he hasn't matched up to Grandpa's shoes. Things do not go very well, and we can see that there is tension all about, to the point where Angie and Nick decide that they are going to abscond in the middle of the night and not tell the family. However, when they try to do this, the real plot begins, as we see they awake to find the house enclosed in metal lining, with only a small slit in the front door, which we're going to talk about soon, to allow things to pass in and out, basically. Very soon after this, the television pops on and tells everyone in the household to await further instructions.
Upon seeing that their house has been completely boarded up, and Ellie is telling them that they need to wait for further instructions, they make the very rational decision to just have Christmas dinner.
Yes. And from this point on, the movie becomes about a group of people locked in a house doing whatever the TV tells them to. I can't possibly imagine anything in real life that would possibly mimic such a set of circumstances. Can you, Acolyte?
No, this movie was made in 2018.
2018.
I cannot imagine a set of circumstances where people be forced to sit in their homes for multiple days by themselves and listen to whatever the television tells them.
And follow, without question. Perhaps they were all awaiting further instruction.
Perhaps they were. 2018.
So once the television begins telling them what to do, Tony takes it upon himself to really step into his manhood and take charge of the family the way Gramps would have wanted.
Yes. Yes, the way that grandfather would have beaten into him. Physically.
Every day, without ceasing.
Squelch.
That is, in fact, Tony's nickname based on him having wet the bed at one point in his childhood for fear of going to the bathroom and waking Daddy up, by the way. So you get the idea of just how severe this childhood was, just how abusive and harmful.
And they worship this old man.
Apparently, yeah, and it's very, very awkward, and it does feed into this idea of your elders being an authority and always trying to match up and always trying to do what will make them happy. So it kind of sets the stage for, the family almost as a microcosm, which is something I wanted to get into with this film. Dating back all the way to the Shakespearean era, we see that there's this idea of the family being a microcosm of the state. And we kind of see that here, where we have authoritative masculine figures who are the heads of the family, yet they are always deferring, or at least Tony always defers, as we'll see, to what he believes is the state. So it's interesting how that dynamic works, how we can see that within the family, it works the same way as we kind of perceive it working, in general, but with the government sort of acting as this overarching head.
After Tony berates Nick and Angie for, I don't know, causing the terrorist attack they believe happened,
Which is really just a stabbing in a shopping center by one crazy person.
they go and have their Christmas dinner. Upon sitting down to eat it, the TV finally gives them their first instruction to dispose of their food because it might be contaminated, including throwing out bags and completely sealed food. 2018, by the way, despite them not knowing how long they'd be locked up and when and where they would get more food, they comply with the television.
Disposing of contaminated food that you don't even know the contamination origins of. 2018, definitely a 2018 film. So at this point, also, I do want to mention that the first thing Tony does before trying to round up the family under his leadership is enlist Scott's help. To remind everyone, Scott is the pregnant Kate's husband. Now, Scott seems to be a very typical guy, and Tony looks to him as almost a sort of protege, or seemingly like a son that Nick isn't to him, because, we also get the clear idea that Nick doesn't listen to him very well. That's why they haven't spoken in several years now. But Scott might listen. So he asks Scott, be my backup. Help me with everything and make sure that people think that I'm right. And all of this comes with Tony's idea that if he follows the instructions of the television and gets everyone else to fall in line, he is a true leader. We're going to see throughout this film just how much Tony wants to live up to Grandpop's example of being in charge. Yet he seems to be unable to do very much without another authoritative figure telling him what to do. In fact, Grandpops even tells him at one point, it's difficult for you to do anything as an office manager without having a central location to call into, as if to tell him, you have to talk to me before you really know what to do. But now he's found another authority figure in the television set. So it's just interesting how he's seeking authority by latching onto someone else's. He does not even have his own masculinity or his own approval from people, from being his own self. And I think that is pervasive. That idea is pervasive throughout the movie. And this idea of not being good enough and trying to link on to something else in order to gain, authority, or to gain a sense of approval is almost kind of like admitting to castration anxiety. And we can see, because it starts with his father, it links into that too. So we've already spoken about that several times, and it is going to be a very common thing in horror. We learned from the Freudian psychoanalytics that Tony is afraid of grandpops. Tony wants people to be afraid of him so that he can man up. But ultimately, he can't really do that.
Very flaccid
Very, yes.
in his aggression.
To make that point all the more, the film takes us to the next set of instructions where the family is asked, can you get naked and basically scrub yourself in bleach?
2018, by the way.
2018, definitely, yes.
Upon the TV telling them that they need to wipe them, that they are contaminated and need to clean themselves down with bleach. 2018, by the way. Nick and Anj, they go into the room. Despite these very ominous circumstances, they are very calm and, in fact, playful. They start messing around with each other while they're naked. Not like that. Well, actually, yes, like that.
I would certainly hope so. It's amazing how the guy who could never live up to dad's expectations and never quite be the man that he was raised to be can actually be with a woman.
Yes, and in fact, very calm in the face of danger. Beth, upon hearing them having fun, decides that she's going to, well, stripping down and bleaching themselves, that she wants to be a little frisky with her husband.
Yes, as we see that Tony immediately rejects his wife sexually because nothing says, honey, I'm a man and I'm in charge, like, put your clothes back on, get those breasts away from me, and let me listen to the television set because it knows best. Now we're going to talk about the next scene in this 2018 movie.
Yes, 2018.
In which a bunch of syringes seem to find their way down the chimney. I guess Santa visited a little bit early.
Actually, it was a little bit late. It was, I believe, the next day.
Ah, yes, that is true. As the family takes a look at this bag of syringes of unknown origin, the TV tells them that they should take these syringes and immediately inject themselves with the unknown substance in it because it will keep them all safe, and kind of hints to them that anyone who doesn't take it is going to be putting everyone in danger in this 2018 movie.
2018. Ah, yes. And upon receiving a bag of syringes and being told to by the television, the father just immediately injects it. Or just like
Oh, he raw dogs it. He raw dogs that needle.
he was told by Anji, who is a doctor, that they are used needles.
I believe she's a medic. She rides in the ambulance, they say.
She is a medically trained professional, immediately just ignores her because, by gosh, she's a woman and a foreigner. I cannot listen to her at all. She does not know what she's doing. The television told me.
So, when even being advised against it by a medical professional, Tony decides that he needs to inject himself immediately. Everyone else's needle is sterilized first, by the way. They get a boiling pot, they put them all in, they take them out, and then everyone else takes the injection. But not Tony. Tony's a leader. Tony's our guy.
Again, because 2018, by the way, we need to tell them. The family has apprehensions to injecting mysterious glowing liquid into their body.
My God, the heathens.
But one by one, they do it, including 2018, by the way, including Kate, who had the most apprehension to doing it because she was pregnant. 2018, by the way.
The only family member who seems to undergo adverse effects from this is Gramps, who seems to almost immediately vomit up black blood and collapse onto the floor. We don't exactly know why this happens, although the Acolyte had a very sound theory.
The father attributes this as him not injecting it soon enough, and it just being either his injection didn't work or they injected him too late and he was already too poisoned.
Right.
I have the feeling that this is just all part of some sick game by the television to just like see if they would literally just Russian roulette kill one of them just by listening to it.
I think that's interesting and definitely very valid because the whole idea is kind of about testing compliance and how far people will go. And you want to see, like, perhaps the idea is to test, are they going to look past this? Are they going to rationalize this? Are they going to rationalize this in such a way that they are still not suspicious of the TV's instructions?
John Master, I just gotta be real with you. This is probably most of these horror movies I've watched so far. Has not jumped into something as ridiculous. One of the films we watched had a person killing people with a camera. And somehow this is like the thing that kind of broke me a little bit. Is it's like you see needles just drop from the sky and just like, okay, yep, let me just like shoot this up right now.
You did almost snap. You were screaming, no, no, you idiot, at the screen. It was pretty great.
I screamed out a lot during this movie for no reason other than 2018, by the way.
I do want to come back to the idea that there is this slot now in the front of the house because upon usage of the syringes, the TV then tells the individuals in the household to take the used up syringes and remove them by putting them through the access slot in the front of the house. Now, anybody who knows anything about horror knows a thing or two about genitals pretty much being everywhere. So this very vaginal slot in the front of the house, I believe, is meant to represent just that. And if that is going to be the vagina in this movie, then the house is going to be the womb. And that's going to come into play much more later on. But even right now, we kind of get this idea that you have a bunch of people in this house that are all essentially, in a way, acting as children who need to be told what to do and how to think. Again, this will come into play very, very much in the ending of the film, but right now I just want to leave it at that. I want to leave it at this idea that the house has essentially become almost a womb. And we do see those metal linings breathe also throughout the film. So it does give us this idea that whatever is encasing them is in some way alive. When returning the syringes to the outside, Scott does lose his fingers to this death vagina. Door de temps.
Scott, upon losing his fingers, and Tony having told Nick how decisive and authoritative he is going to be, sees that Scott, his son that he never had, is gravely injured, kind of freaks out and does nothing, goes catatonic. Well, Nick, the reject failure son, and Angie, the foreigner who knows nothing, immediately take charge and effectively treat Scott, stop the bleeding, and stop possibility of an infection.
Well, things going wrong is the area of failures. When you're a strong, take charge kind of man, you can't have those sorts of things. So clearly, this isn't real.
Yes, and it seems to be a continuing theme. About this, every time something seems to go wrong, the take charge man Tony is gone.
Yeah, and that brings back this idea of something that I wanted to say for a while throughout the film. Strict raising actually breeds weakness, not strength. And I think that's a super important point that is never heavily belabored in the film, but it's important to note nonetheless. It's this idea that you're going to breed reliance on authority. You're going to create people that can't think for themselves. Maybe the reason Tony needs to go to the central office or to grandpops to know to do anything is because he was raised to think everything that he did was wrong.
And you see that with Nick, everything he was told that he's raised wrong and raised weakly, and he is incredibly decisive in his actions and doesn't seem to question it, just knows what he's doing. But upon seeing that Nick and Angie have done some good and stopped the disaster from happening, the TV informs them that one of them is infected and needs to be quarantined.
2018.
Yes, 2018. The group immediately knows who was infected. The brown one.
So because she's clearly infected, they lock up their only medic.
Now, if Angie's locked into quarantine, 2018 by the way, the family is becoming more and more upset and confused. Well, Nick and Angie trying to figure out what the hell is happening. It must be something with the TV. Everything they do, the TV reacts to specifically. Angie tells Nick to just unplug the TV, which he does.
So at this point, we do see Tony have what I believe is a very telling conversation with his son, Nick, in which he talks about the pressures of fatherhood, which it seems like he can't really handle, and also mentions the importance of trusting in a higher power. I think that this, in a sense, is almost self-contradictory because he's supposed to be the masculine authority figure, and yet he talks about needing to rely on a higher power to even deal with the pressures of fatherhood. And we see just how much he relies on the authority of others while trying to be his own man when Nick unplugs the television to see what will happen and Tony breaks down.
Scott also wanting to prove that he is just as a man as Tony is. He gets into a fist fight with Nick over unplugging a goddamn TV.
He's risking everyone's lives by not doing what the television tells them to do. We can see by his behavior that the father has learned to trust the appliance.
Kate, wanting to be, I guess, a good wife, follows her husband like 1 foot away from him while he's in a fist fight. Then they climb up the stairs in a fist fight with Kate 1 foot behind them.
How could this possibly go wrong, Acolyte?
Kate gets thrown off the 2nd floor.
Boom. And uh-oh, there's a wound that also ends up becoming septic. Who could possibly do something about that?
Well, we don't want to break quarantine now, do we?
Definitely not 2018.
2018, by the way. So, again, we gotta mention Kate is dying. And once again, Tony, the decisive man of action, has chosen to quite literally lock himself away at this point.
So with Kate dying and our upstanding father and head of the family locked away in turmoil, mental turmoil as it may be, Nick decides to take it upon himself to investigate and see what he can find out about the circumstance. So he goes to the bathroom, digs out a hole behind the toilet plumbing, takes his phone, tapes it to a stick, and puts it in to the wall of the house, where he finds that something is moving and attacks the phone.
Nick, finally having some information of what the hell is happening outside and seeing it is something unworldly, tries to tell his family desperately what is happening. But the television has given them another instruction.
They're going to need to extract information from the sleeper agent, which is defined just like that, by the way, in the instruction. It just says the sleeper agent. Kind of has a Monsters on Maple Street episode of The Twilight Zone vibe to it, if you think about it.
Upon finding out that there is a sleeper agent they must extract information from, Tony, continuing the theme of the Milgram experiment, decides he must brutally torture his own son.
All for the good of the family, of course.
The government told them to.
The government, which at this point, they still believe the TV is...
Despite having physical proof that this is some crazy shit, like an alien or something.
Well, it's proof they never see now.
Tony, being a decisive man of action, upon being presented absolute proof, destroys it.
Before even witnessing it, because we have to trust the appliance.
Yes. Right as Tony is about to rip out his son's own eye because a television told him to, Kate finally dies.
We learn about this from the screams that we hear. And of course, everyone just assumes that Kate and the baby are both gone and wraps them up just like Grandpa.
Upon Kate dying and the father having done nothing but hurt his family, he finally accepts maybe the television is not telling him things for his best interest. Now that the family is finally starting to think about this all rationally, Angie has also discovered whatever this creature is living inside of their televisions.
Right. She breaks open a smaller television set that's in the room she's quarantined in and sees that there is apparently a bubbling black living mass within it. Shortly after this discovery, we learn that the ventilation holes that were in the metal lining of the building, which I know we didn't mention that before, but there are holes in the metal lining surrounding the house. And of course, Tony insists that these are to give them proper clean air that's filtered, begin to put out poison smog gas.
They're able to rescue Angie, but at that time, Beth, trapped in one of the bathrooms, gets dissolved by this gas.
She kind of melts and then looks like she explodes.
Yeah, she melts and explodes at the same time.
It's kind of both. It's very, very interesting how they chose to do that. And much like a lot of this movie, we don't get a full explanation of why exactly that happened, but that's not really the point.
Honestly, with that one, I think it was just a special effects guy who was like really good at doing both and wanted an excuse to do both.
You know what? I would take it. It made the movie more interesting. I did not expect an exploding mom.
Now, with the house being filled with poison gas, now with 3 dead people,
possibly a fourth, or so we think at this point, meaning the unborn child.
And having nowhere else to turn to, there's one more authority figure that for Tony to listen to.
And if you can't look at all the carnage and chaos that surrounds you and think the government is responsible for this, there's only one thing that could possibly have committed such acts and still be a trusted authority figure, and that would be our Lord and Savior. As Tony looks at the TV, all of the cold government type instructions seem to dissipate, and we see what looks like an eye, although to some people it might look like an anus. It's a little weirdly positioned. But we see this eye, and we see very religious words beginning to appear on the screen. That everything that happened was essentially the act of God, that this is what had to happen, that this is what has been ordained. And Tony looks on in awe, trusting it, as clearly it must have just been God this entire time, trying to see perhaps if we were worthy. And what I want to mention here is government and religion together are obviously two types of patriarchal structures or or at least traditionally are such, much like what Tony wants his family to be under him. So we do see both archetypes visited in this film. That I think what they wanted to make clear, what the filmmakers wanted to make clear, is that this is not just about the government. This is very much about authority, about trusting it too much, about compliance, and about being willing to put yourself in the hands of something else, some social or spiritual, semi-spiritual structure that is controlling and rigid and seeks to have the masses act at its will. That's the reason we get this. That's the reason they think it's the government, and then we think it's God, or at least the voice of God on earth, as many religious organizations would portend to be.
Yes, upon seeing this in the TV, informing them that they are the savior, Kate starts having contractions. Now that Ange and Nick are both free from their confounds, they immediately know that they need to perform a C-section right now, or that baby is not going to make it. Upon trying to get a knife to do that, the TV tells them that they have to worship it. And because Tony is only ever decisive when someone else tells him what to do, forces them to stop and starts threatening to kill his son because the TV told them they had to stop them.
That's middle management syndrome for you, friends. I do want to bring up a quote at this point that Tony screams at Nick like it's an insult. You could never do what you were told. And obviously at this point, we kind of know that he's really only insulting himself because Tony only can do what he is told. It actually reminds me of a famous Napoleon Hill quote. Napoleon Hill, who was a success coach and the protege of Andrew Carnegie, who said that there are two types of people who don't get far in this world. One is the man who cannot do what he's told. The other is the man who cannot do anything else. It seems to be that second part that all of these characters, except for Nick, have a problem with.
So with Tony suddenly going on a rampage and Scott not wanting his unborn child to fucking die, they get into a fight and Scott's dead. Tony is stabbed and they need to finally stop this bullshit.
So, of course, it's time for the TV to step into its manhood, by which I mean large cable wires extending out from it, grabbing a hold of Tony, injecting themselves into him, and moving him around like a veritable puppet. I think that obviously the point here is he always was. Tony is now being used at the behest of this entity's will that is clearly not a religious institution or a governmental institution's mouthpiece. It is itself. It is just supposed to be representative in general, as horror often is, of something scary. In this case, authority that does not have your best interest in mind and you being overly compliant to it. Tony is now its puppet and also its mouthpiece that speaks only its will.
Worship me.
Worship me. 2018.
The TV monster that has now controlled Tony, like it has this entire film, not quite literally, demands that they need to worship it. Nick and Angie, who have been defiant the entire time, continue to be so, discovering that it is like any institution of power, completely weak and useless if you just tell it no.
Indeed, because it merely backs away from Nick, it being Machine Tony or Creature Tony, whatever we're going to be calling him at this point, backs away from Nick, not quite wanting to harm him at this point because it's hoping to indoctrinate him. And I'm using that word on purpose. It wants to indoctrinate Nick, and it needs Nick to be willing for that to happen.
Nick, having never listened to his father anyway, says, fuck it, grabs a bottle and destroys the beating monster heart of the television.
It's all just about pissing off Daddy, isn't it?
As the walls reel in pain, it seems like the TV has come to a conclusion. There still is one person left in this house, and it doesn't need those two.
Nope. It only needs the younger generation, 2018. After killing Nick and Angie, those dirty infidels as it were, you see these same cables that were also controlling Tony creep over Kate's corpse, slowly encasing her until they eventually draw back, leaving nothing but a smoking skeleton behind. And what do we see that it has taken from Kate's corpse but her now just born child, born into the indoctrination as it is left nestled in the cords and cables next to an active TV that seems to be showing the child images of colorful orbs bouncing back and forth because now it is going to take the new generation and raise it in the image that it would like that generation to exist in.
This was the most bizarre ad for Cocomelon I have ever seen.
Yes. If we wanted to see a completely soulless corporate overtaking of our children's minds, we would have just watched Cocomelon and done an episode on that.
Honestly, this was probably less scary than an episode of that show.
So there we have it. The movie at its core is about compliance, and it is about weakness in people that believe too much in the authority figures and the institutional structures that they are taught to believe in when they are young. We need to learn to think for ourselves, the film says. And this, once again, is how horror is not just about blood and guts and being afraid or even just being angry. Horror can be extremely morally and intellectually educational in teaching us to think critically about our surroundings and about the things that we should be afraid of, but not perhaps for the reasons that we think we should. In other words, we shouldn't be afraid of the authority figure coming down on us if we don't do what we're told. Perhaps we should be afraid of precisely doing what we're told. 2018, by the way, once again.
I want to say at this point, unfortunately, the director, Johnny Kevorkian,
And quite a name that is.
yeah, that's his name, he has unfortunately died. He died in November of 2020 from a heart attack. I would too if I just watched the movie I made just come to real life.
2018, meet 2020. So if you liked what we had to say, I'll once again ask you to give that like button a stab and stalk us with a subscribe. We'd also like to know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Have you had an experience in your life with people who seem like they want to be authoritative but really can't think for themselves? Or have you seen instances of institutional power being too far abused? If you have anything that relates to this, or even if you just like the movie and want to comment on it, or if you have any other similar movies that you'd like to possibly recommend to us for a future episode, comment down below. We'd love to hear everything that you have to say. For now, this has been the Endarkened podcast. This has been our episode on Await Further Instructions, and
This has been The Acolyte.
I am Shadow Master, once again, creeping off into the darkness.